Hello everybody, I'm Alicia Gadsden and welcome to LiveFit Kitchen. I am sharing with you a completely new recipe today. New to me, maybe new to you as well. I found it on myrecipes.com and we'll share the link with you later. This recipe I'm trying brand new on camera for the first time because so many people when they start to cook healthy say, well, I don't know how to do it. And a lot of people feel nervous about trying new recipes. So I thought we could do it together. Now I am using a Dutch oven for the recipe and it does call for that. If you don't have a Dutch oven, just use a great big soup pan. Don't let the equipment put you off. Now I have preheated it just a little bit, and the first thing we're going to do is add a tablespoon of olive oil. And I think I forgot to mention, by the way, this is a Moroccan chicken and butternut squash soup. So it's wonderful, it's warm, it's seasonal, it's going to have some great flavors. I love the spices that are going in it. So I preheated my Dutch oven on medium heat for about 5 minutes. So when the oil went in, it started to spread straight away. You immediately add a cup of onion. I'm using brown onion here. And I've chopped it up into very small pieces. And the recipe calls for that to be sauteed for 4 minutes. So I'm going to turn the heat down just a little bit because I could see as soon as I put the onion in, a couple little pieces started to brown up right away. My pot was a little on the warm side. So I've turned the heat down to medium-low. Make sure that the oil coats the onion completely. And we'll put the lid back on. And I will check that about halfway through the time that they've given it and give it a little stir. And then we'll be back to it. So the onion has been cooking for 4 minutes and it's browned up quite nicely. I did stir it at the 2-minute mark and we're back here at 4 minutes, and the onion, some of the edges are really quite brown and that looks lovely. So next up we're adding the chicken thigh. This is 12 ounces of chicken thighs. It was 4 medium-sized thighs and I've cut them into fairly small pieces because I want them to cook well. There's a couple of tricks with cutting chicken, and I did, by the way, I trimmed almost all of the visible fat. Not every tiny little smidgen of it, but pretty close. Now, one way to trim and cook chicken easily is actually to use kitchen scissors. And, you know, I do have a pair that I keep in the kitchen only for food. They're super sharp, very slightly serrated, and even just for trimming the fat, they really make it a lot easier and a lot faster to just get that off. And then it's easy to use a nice sharp knife to cut the chicken into the pieces. The pieces I ended up with were about a 1/2 inch cubes. So I've stirred those around so the little bit of oil that's left in there and the onion have mixed well with the chicken, and the chicken is even starting to brown already. And the recipe, once again, calls for another few minutes for this to sit. So I've got that in a nice even flat layer on the bottom of the pan so it'll all cook evenly. And we'll put the lid back on. So that's a total of 4 minutes of cooking the chicken on a medium to lower heat. And again, I did stir it at the 2-minute mark. The chicken looks almost entirely cooked. Not all the way there, but it's getting there. So that was those little 1/2 inch cubes, and that turned out to be a good choice, cutting it that small. So next up we add the spices. We have cumin, cinnamon, and red pepper. Now, of course, with the red pepper, if you're not into spicy, you'll want to use less. We're using a full teaspoon of cumin, and this is the ground cumin. And I'm just going to sprinkle that. I have a 1/2 teaspoon size in my hand in case you're wondering why I'm going back. Okay, so that's a teaspoon of cumin sprinkled fairly evenly. And then, switching sizes, a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, so just a little bit there, again sprinkled fairly evenly over everything. And you may know that cinnamon is used a lot in Moroccan cooking, and just a little bit really adds just a whole different direction to the dish. And then I am using a 1/4 teaspoon of the red pepper. This is the really spicy stuff, so the recipe said an 1/8 to a 1/4 teaspoon. I like spicy, so I'm using the full 1/4 teaspoon. So those go in, and you just want to cook that for about a minute just to let the spices really coat the chicken that's in there. The onion by this time has completely browned and cooked down. It's almost totally translucent, very soft onion in there now. So we're still on a medium to lower heat, but the side of that Dutch oven is getting a little hot, so I'll be bringing the pot holder in. And just give that a minute for all of those spices to really combine, especially that red pepper. If you are using the red pepper there, you want to make sure that that's pretty evenly distributed. So our next ingredient is our butternut squash. And I picked this up pre-cut into fairly small chunks. So, you know, if you don't like to cut big squash, if you're worried about the knife or whatever, you can buy it pre-cut fairly inexpensively. And that's 3 cups of squash going in there. And joining it is 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. And you want the unsalted tomato paste here. So 2 tablespoons there. And sauteing that for another minute. And again, just stirring it around, making sure that the tomato paste evenly distributes itself. Now, I said at the beginning I haven't made this before. I think the key with the butternut squash cooking properly is to use these smaller chunks. So if you are buying a whole squash and cutting it down yourself, I would definitely go with medium to smaller size pieces. It doesn't take a long time to cook, not as long as, say, a sweet potato, for example, but it does take a little while. So I've got everything nicely combined. And next, we're adding the chicken stock. 4 cups of chicken stock, which very conveniently is 1 package. I am using the low sodium. So 4 cups is 32 ounces. Like I said, that's that entire package, all of it going in there. Give that a little stir. And you want to bring this all the way up to the boil. So let's turn that high. If you want it to boil a little faster, you can put the lid back on. Once you've brought it to a boil, turn it down to a simmer and leave it to simmer for 8 minutes. So we'll let that boil and then we'll turn it down. The soup has now been simmering away for 8 minutes on the lowest heat. It's just barely bubbling in the pot there. Now the recipe calls for 1/3 of a cup of uncooked couscous. That's from wheat, and I prefer to be gluten-free, so being unable to follow a recipe exactly as I am, I'm using quinoa instead. I pre-cooked the quinoa because I know that it takes a little while to cook, so I got it almost completely cooked, just barely off, just so that when it finishes cooking it doesn't go soggy. So the recipe says 1/3 cup uncooked couscous. If you're okay with gluten, go ahead and use that. If you prefer to be gluten-free, I'm using 3/4 of a cup of almost completely cooked quinoa. So that goes in, and we'll stir that around. You're also adding a cup of zucchini, cut into medium-sized chunks there. If you read the recipe on the website, I believe it said a medium zucchini cut up, and I always want to know exactly how much that really is. What does medium mean? So I measured it, comes out to about a cup. That's all stirred around. The final ingredient here for this part of the recipe is 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Sprinkle that in. Again, if you're on a low sodium nutrition plan, you might skip that, or you might just cut it down, or you may use a salt substitute. I do like to use sea salt. It has that kind of extra flavor. So give that a stir and then leave it on that low heat, and it needs just a few more minutes on the stove. And the soup has had a final 5 minutes of bubbling away, just barely simmering, letting that zucchini cook just lightly. And we have one more step before we serve it, and that is to add a 1/2 cup of basil. I'm sorry, the recipe did say to remove it from the heat at this point, so we'll turn that off. So 1/2 cup of shredded basil, and 2 teaspoons of orange zest, which is the rind or the skin of the orange. You just want the orange part, not the white part. The white part is the pith, and that's a little bit bitter sometimes, so just get the orange parts. You can use either a zester or you can use a microplaner like you might use for some cheeses. And the trick I discovered as I was prepping for this recipe was to use a very firm orange, and you'll need either 2 small oranges or 1 large orange to get 2 teaspoons of just the zest. One of my oranges, I had 2 small ones, and one of them was kind of soft. It was quite difficult to get the zest off that, and I hit my thumb a couple of times. So stir the orange zest and the basil through. One more stir, it looks very pretty. So remember, this is the first time I have ever made this recipe. I found it online and I thought I would try it here with you today. And so this is literally the first ever official taste test. So I've got some of all of the ingredients and some of the liquid as well. And it's extremely hot, so we'll just give that a moment. It smells amazing. I know I say this all the time, but I do wish that we could communicate the smell with you because it really smells so, so good. Ooh, wow. So for those of you that aren't into spicy, that 1/4 teaspoon of the red pepper made it a little spicy. Not crazy, my tongue's not burning, but it's got a little bit of a kick to it. That's a really hearty, delicious soup. It made quite a lot. There's a lot of servings in there. The chicken cooked perfectly. I'm really, really pleased with it. So please be brave, get out there and try new healthy recipes. You can do it.